Hello. Today in my storytelling playlist, I'm going to talk about Halloween and reverse culture shock, coming back to the US, that sort of thing. So this past Saturday, I was invited to a block party for Halloween. I haven't been to one in a long time. If you're new to my channel, you probably don't know that I lived abroad, but I lived abroad since 2009, mostly in South Korea and some other Asian countries, but I also did a brief stint in Mexico. But the Halloween parties were not of this magnitude. I came back here about 5 months ago, and it's been a bit of a culture shock, I have to admit, a reverse culture shock. This party was in a Detroit suburb called Royal Oak, and Royal Oak is a strange neighborhood. In my youth, it was the up-and-coming neighborhood. You know, it was kind of the hip place, but gentrification changed that. The prices rose, a lot of the cool businesses moved to a place called Ferndale or downtown, and it just became more corporate, and I think that's part of what's wrong with Detroit and maybe the USA in general. The cool, unique, small businesses have been pushed out by two extremes. On one hand, the corporate brand stores push them out, and then on the other hand, there's this kind of destitution, and that's sort of the other extreme. One thing that Detroit is good at is having parties. I know that just from my youth. I have a Detroit party video in my storytelling playlist. I'll link it above. Parties here are just a different animal. I think Detroiters take partying very seriously, not just drinking and that kind of thing, but also the amount of effort put into the party and kind of the size of the party. You know, a lot of rave stuff started here, so, you know, we've been doing parties for a long time. I think because it's so down and out that people need it. So when they do it right. So since I've been back, it's been a challenge in many, many, many ways. I'm not going to go too far into all those things. Maybe I'll do that in a different video. But one of the major challenges has been reintegrating with people I've known from the past. My travels have changed me considerably, but they've also made it very clear to me that America has also changed since I left. But here are some takeaways from this party. On one hand, I did have fun. It was cool seeing different costumes. Americans can be very creative when we're inspired, Detroit especially. As far as I could tell, there were no fights or arguments. That's always a good thing. The DJs were playing great music. Now, with the good things out of the way, it was also very difficult. I had several people start conversations with me on politics. I think pre-2016, that was the last topic people would talk about at a party, aside from religion maybe. But I found with several people, that was the first thing that came out of their mouth. I personally don't think that's a good way to start a conversation. I got the sense people were trying to see where you stand. In some cases, that kind of offended me a little bit. If you stand somewhere aside from the two polarized locations, then more questions ensue. And I didn't come to a party to talk about politics, you know? I came to have fun and to just have, you know, basic conversation. I don't know if that's the place for this kind of conversation. I found this irritating, actually. I don't drink anymore, and I also noticed a lot of people kind of hanging by a thread. There were always the people that went too far. I mean, I've seen it time and time again when I did drink. Being sober and looking at it, it was a different story. I could definitely see like a desperation there. One drink away from the whole thing coming undone or something. As the night went on, it actually made me a little bit sad. It also made me think back to when I drank, which was for, you know, a lot of my life. And at that time, I thought I was having fun. But looking at some of the people that were struggling, it made me realize that maybe I was hanging by a thread also back then. Which put me in kind of a weird mood because I was thinking about that and I was considering how I got through it all, first of all, but also maybe the experiences I had were not really what I thought they were. After seeing a lot of these people and also the political conversations, I realized that maybe America is also hanging by a thread. I could see it. Fear on both sides. What's going to happen next? Do I have to pick a side? Am I choosing the right side? And with me living abroad for so long, I just saw it almost like an anthropologist or something, watching two strange species kind of like dance around each other. It was very strange. You know, it was like when you see two groups of chimps and they're kind of trying to like test each other out, you know, and they're like banging the ground and stuff. There's a lot of that kind of thing. Detroit people are very unique. When I was abroad, I ran into people from Michigan, but very few people that were, Detroiters. So I was standing there, and one of the DJs, I looked when he came up to take his turn. I was like, I know that costume. I thought about it for a second, and I'm like, he kind of looks like the Mad Hatter, but it wasn't right. And then I realized, I'm like, oh my God, he's Slade, the band Slade, the guy from Slade. And I was just like, oh, that's awesome. And I had to make sure. So I went up and I asked him, are you the Mad Hatter or are you Slade? And he was like really surprised that I got it because no one else did. But after that happened, then he started talking to me a lot. After he got done DJing, he came over and, was chatting with me a lot, which was cool. He lived in Hamtramck. And I used to live in Hamtramck a long time ago, over 20 years ago. It's interesting because I knew he was living in downtown Detroit before he even opened his mouth. I could just tell. I don't know how, but I could tell. I don't know, there's a certain kind of person that lives down there. I don't know. And they don't necessarily live in the suburbs. I'm not exactly sure why he was up here. I think he was friends with the guy that owned the house because there were several houses. There were quite a few people there, actually. I would say more than 100. But as I talked to him more and more, it made me start thinking just about my time away and not seeing people like this. It's just interesting that there's such a unique kind of person that only is in Detroit. I'm sure that is the same for many other cities. You probably spot it, if you were out of your hometown. It also made me, sad isn't the right word, but it made me a little bit kind of melancholy for that time of when I did live down there. Even though it was very, very difficult, there was a certain energy about it, and the people were very creative, and this guy was incredibly creative. The problem is that world doesn't exist anymore because Detroit has changed so much. I don't think for the better. I think little elements of that still remain, but not like it was then. And I don't even know if it exists for younger people like it did for me. This guy was probably my age or, a little bit younger than me maybe. I suspect that for someone that's like 20 or 25, Detroit is a very different place than it was when I was down there. So what did I take away from this night? Well, there are a few questions I asked myself. Is coming back here going to be more difficult than I thought it would be? And I did think it was going to be difficult. I had no illusions about that. After going to this party, this was the first big social event I went to. I've been to smaller things, but this was the first big one. It made me realize that maybe I have a lot more to deal with than I bargained for. The next question is, how does one balance on the edge of two sides of an earthquake or a ravine that's moving away from each other? And also, what if I agree with one side more than the other? And with that said, maybe I do, but maybe I don't want to be boxed into anything. Maybe I just want to be me. There were certainly moments where I wondered if it would just be easier to leave. When you're out in the world, some people bring their politics, but many mute their opinions to some degree. They do this to adapt to whatever culture they find themselves in. But the irony of all this is that coming back to my own culture, I found myself muting my opinions to some degree and being more of an observer. I just didn't really want to participate, if that makes any sense. It's almost like I was taking notes. I guess I was assessing what I need to consider as I move forward here. Anyway, the party was a strange place to be. I did enjoy myself. And Halloween is my favorite holiday, not really because of the pagan aspect, but because of the creative aspect. I don't know. Maybe it's like going into cold water or something. Jumping in is the best way to do it. I don't know. I do know this. I know that it's going to be a challenge if I stay here. And I'm still kind of struggling with that, whether I'm going to or not. If you have anything to say about returning to your country and not being able to do it, and any advice, you can post that below. Or if you have anything to say about Halloween or any of these kind of things, you can also post that below. But that's all I got. Happy Halloween.